When someone you love just disappears, it messes with your entire life. For me, it was my 13-year-old brother David. We were living in a small farm town in the Pennsylvania countryside. At that time, we were living in one of the oldest houses in town, built in the late 1700s. On the night he went missing, my parents weren't home, but back in the 80s it was considered okay to leave your kids home alone. My brother and I were sitting on the living room floor listening to the radio broadcast. My brother asked me to fill him a glass of Hawaiian punch. After I went to the kitchen and poured him a glass, he had completely vanished from the living room. I thought he was playing a trick on me, but when I searched every room in the house, nothing was out of place. He couldn't have gone outside because I was by the front door the whole time and the windows were sealed shut. The basement door in the living room was wide open, the only place he could have gone. When I left to fill up his drink, it was shut. I was horrified of the basement as a kid because there was no electricity down there, and it literally looked like a dungeon. When my parents finally pulled into the driveway the next morning, I was still in tears when I told them about David. Mom and Dad checked the whole house. I then told Dad about how the basement door was wide open. When he walked down into the basement, I sat on the couch next to the basement door, hoping he would walk back up with David. But when Dad walked up those stairs, his face had gone completely pale. In his hands were my brother's clothes from the night before. I can't describe how horrified I was. He dropped them onto the ground and walked upstairs to where Mom was. I then crawled toward the clothes, exactly what my brother was wearing before he disappeared. I sorted through them. Shirt, pants, underwear, socks, everything stripped from him. I could hear my parents' voices from upstairs. My mother then came sprinting down the stairs and got on the phone with the police. My dad ran outside and into the field. When the police arrived, they thought he must have gone outside and gotten lost in the nearby forest. But I knew he was in that house. The police officers spent weeks searching the woods and fields near our house. They checked the basement but found nothing. They closed the case about half a year later. The entire town assumed it was a kidnapping. I knew it had something to do with that basement, but I could never bring myself to go down there. After his disappearance, life continued for our family. We turned David's bedroom into a guest bedroom. I hated how my parents did that. It felt like they were trying to move on. I was unable to. Losing David cast a huge shadow over my entire family. Mom's way of coping with the grief was erasing all memory of him. I hated her for that. Every time I looked at that basement door growing up, I could feel something behind it. One day when I was 16, I was putting DVDs away in the living room, sitting just a few feet away from that door, and, well, I smelled something familiar. The smell was seeping through the cracks of the door. It was what my brother smelled like. I nearly ripped that door off the hinges and ran downstairs into the darkness. The entire room smelled like David's old bedroom. It was pitch black, but I knew he was in there. I screamed his name for hours until Dad finally came down. Dad couldn't smell it. He thought I was insane. I remember I couldn't talk for weeks after that. I woke up early the next morning and drove to the house. It felt odd driving back. Those fields felt so familiar. I tried not to think about how scared I was of that basement growing up. Fortunately, my dad finally added electricity down there. I pulled into the driveway and the couple was waiting outside for me. They said it smelled like something was rotting down there. I had everything I'd need: asbestos masks, medical gloves, and eye protection. I worked as an air duct cleaner a few years ago, so I have some background knowledge. I walked into the house and headed for the basement door. I never saw what it actually looked like down there until now. I opened the door and could immediately smell it. Something was rotting. I turned on the light switch. Ahead of me was an empty room, about 15 by 10 feet. Seeing it with the lights on felt off. The walls were stone except for one. One wall was wood instead of stone. The smell was clearly coming from the wood. The wood was rotting. I thought the best idea would be to tear the whole wall down. I started tearing pieces of rotten wood off the walls. Light started to seep into the other side. There was a secret room in the basement. I stopped and saw what looked like human flesh. I couldn't describe how horrified I was. I would rather go to hell than relive that moment. I started smashing the wall with all the force in my body until it finally gave in. The creature in front of me, just the sight of it made me want to claw my eyes out. It was in a fetal position. The skin wasn't pale, it was white and looked like the flesh had been melted to the bones. The fingernails and toenails stretched halfway across the room. The worst part was that it wasn't dead. It was breathing. It was alive. "David," I said in a terrified voice. It slowly lifted its head and looked at me. The face was completely mutated, but those eyes were my brother's eyes. It tried to speak. It tried with everything in it. That thing was my brother David. I had so many questions. How was he alive? What did he eat? How could he breathe? What the hell happened? I kept the questions to myself. That was my brother in that basement. This whole time, he's been in that basement. I didn't say another word to him. I ran upstairs and out to my car. I opened my glove box and grabbed my gun. By the time I got downstairs, David had stood up, dragging his long nails behind him. "Julian!" he growled. I then shot him in the head. At the top of the stairs were the tenants questioning the gunshot. They walked down the stairs to investigate. By the time I heard them scream, I was already out the door and backing out of the driveway. I didn't shoot David because I was scared of him. I shot him because of how awful the situation was. That was 2 days ago. I've been driving ever since. The only time I stopped was to fill my gas tank. I don't know where I am. Last time I checked, I was in Kansas. I don't know what to do. Should I join David in the afterlife, or should I try to move on? The most sickening thing is not knowing what happened. What the hell happened? I keep asking myself. What the hell happened?